things that we were thinking of, right? The first thing is like there is always a lot of challenges in trying to make a successful workplace, right? So there is the vision, and the architect has to take that vision and break it down into reality. Then you have the project manager who's got to build it, and then he comes down really hard with a stick and says, okay, fine, do it, but there's a budget, and then there's a timeline, okay? And then you have like the end user who says, you didn't really do what I wanted. So how best can we, get our grip on something like this? And let me tell you, right now we have about 100+ years of experience sitting on the stage right now, right? 30 years, 20 years. I mean, it's exactly. All right, so we're gonna actually, I'm gonna throw this at Ritu because I think she needs to start this conversation on, the challenges that we face trying to make a successful workplace.
Thank you, Fancy. And firstly, thank you to, the ITP team to having me here. It's really nice to meet my peers and my friends after a very long time. Probably my first event after pandemic, which we are having in person. So it's truly special for me to be here today. I'll just go back. It's like, and I'll go back to my childhood, and I'm sure each one of you all have experienced it too. So when you're growing up, most of the times, these days, kids have a say in what they want. If you go back in time and look at your own childhood, it was probably the parents trying to put their thoughts and vision, onto us to say, this is what you wear, this is where you go, this is what you learn in terms of your extracurricular activities. So I think I'm just drawing an analogy from that experience of mine, and that's how it is, right? And we touched upon it briefly in the previous conversation. So most of the times it's the vision of the company, the vision of the management that is trying to be brought to fruition with having a conversation with the multiple stakeholders that have to come together to give reality to that vision in terms of a, if I may say, particularly a real estate project, right? But the question over here is, while yes, the management and the leadership vision is important, I think one of the very important stakeholders that we often miss are the various persona of people who are actually coming and engaging in that particular project, right?
Absolutely. Right.
So, and I'd like to go back to a study that I did many years back. My study says that in any commercial real estate building, there are close to 19 different personas that come and engage in your building every day. Now, are we creating a vision, for that 20% of people who've probably thought about the organization and have brought it down to say, this is how I want my project to look like? That's important. It's a very, very critical input to be able to bring it to reality. But is that the only input? In my mind, I think it's also important to cater to these 19 different personas, of which employee is one of the important stakeholders. But outside of the employees, there are visitors, there are people who are coming from our, cross-geographical facilities and other countries who are working for the same organization. Today, we engage a lot of suppliers to do our core work, so maybe there is contract employees also coming in. So is the vision catering to meet the requirement or the needs of all these various people who come and engage? I think that's, for me, one of the very important starting points. How do you bring it together? I take inspiration from design thinking. And I was exposed to this almost about 8 years back in one of my, I would say, career-changing assignments at Honeywell. I think if we bring in the concept of design thinking into, how we create the vision, how we articulate the whole thought process, the future will look a lot more brighter, right? I'll stop there because there's lots more to add.
Yes.
But that's where I will stop for now. Fancy.
Okay. So I want to actually pass this on to Sabina because I think she and I have been colleagues for many years also, and then, and she's also been part of I think one of the largest campuses in Bangalore, which was Cisco, and there's been a ton of debates there. I think you can add a lot of value to this discussion right now. Sabina.
Thanks, Fancy. Such an interesting topic. And I think, throughout our career, we've been engaged at various different levels. The level of interaction that we had at Cisco was a particular level where there was a vision that was thought about for many years. In a lot of other organizations, we've been lucky enough to be part of the management, the business users. And I think a great example, Ritu, was the Honeywell approach, in which you spent a year to identify what that vision was, and the stakeholders were coming together to identify the vision. Another major player in the industry today, a very fast-growing tech company, floated RFP for designers, and this was one of their campus, one of the fastest-growing companies, IT companies in the world, and was heavily into workplace strategy, technology, you have it all. And we came in as the design partner for the competition, but we were not part of the total vision of the technology and the audio visual, and there were, different silos that had done this, and there was a technology silo. And while you're talking about workplace, you don't have the width of the vision as to, how. So I think some of those integrated discussions, which I saw in Honeywell, that they spent a year trying to do that before we start a project, is a great idea. We did it in VMware to some extent, where we had the real estate as well as the business users part of every design presentation, and all of us were going along every step of the way. So I think it's a great topic and a very interesting one, and then who leads what, and how do you collaborate together, and how do you synthesize, get along together to create that end vision?
Yeah, absolutely, because then I'm going to now throw this at you, Vikas, because, you are literally in the thick of things, okay? And you are like helping the whole stakeholders come up with that vision. So what exactly, what do you think the process has to be in terms of getting this vision out to the architects and the SMEs and the consultants? Because ultimately a successful workplace has to be that vision has to be well thought out. Because a lot of times, the brief that comes into architects is like, hey, this is the brief. You got 1 month to finish the design, then another 2 weeks, I want the tender drawings. Nothing gets translated in such a short time. And it's not that they're not capable, but it's the fact that I think the stakeholders have not gone through the process to understand the design and be comfortable with it.
So what I like to say is that there's never that kind of a collision course when it comes to architecture or facility manager. But then let's also understand that architect's job or a job of a PMC, it's only for the duration of that project. And then a facility manager has to live through the project till the time it lasts, the next 10 to 12 years, which is, say, roughly around 10 to 15 times what the other two stakeholders will be part of that project.
Absolutely,
okay?
Yes. Yeah.
And let's understand, I'll give you an example. An architect would have decided that let's go with these lights. But you ask a FM how difficult it is to maintain these lights.
Right.
How do I clean them? How do I maintain them? And if they are not cleaned properly, they don't look good. So, could it have been a possibility where an architect could have gone with an alternative design? Had there been a FM who was well educated enough to suggest we should go for alternatives? If an architect is not pushed to those things or asked those questions, they will not. But then I'm sure you being architects, and we have worked together, rubbed shoulders and done all the work what we have done over the last few years, we end up creating much better workplaces when we collaborate as a team.
Absolutely, yes.
So my 2 cents is that let's look at the pain points or the challenges a FM goes through. Because if the facility is not maintained well, he is the one who's questioned. And there have been great organizations when I was also part of the IPC's team before moving to the client role. There have been clients who were well educated when they were designing their new spaces. They used to be calling the FMs on the table to have that interaction or a dialogue. What are the current challenges in the present workplace you are facing, and how we can together partner to build upon those challenges. So getting the architects and the facility managers as the part of the design conceptualization phase is an integral part to put that narrative into the perspective. It's not that a facility manager has something against the architect, but then from operational perspective, from the time it's being put into use, how do we together, because people should not pinpoint later, yes, the architects could have thought through it better, but was there somebody to guide it through? Because you will be putting, and then what we have also seen is, there will be certain global architects. I'm sure now, Sabina, yourself, who have been working now in the Indian
30 years.
geography for long, know the nuances.
Yeah.
A person like now, or a designer like now, without taking any names, or who are international in Spiel now, they would not. They would say, now, if this can work in a San Jose, why it not? My friend, the kind of dust and the kind of weather we have here, all those design elements will not work. Let's be mindful of that. So that's the only perspective what I would say now. Wear a hat of a FM and then see what pain points.
So
he
you're
has.
agreeing to the fact that it's just not the architect or the PM or the real estate leader, but it's the FM, the facility manager. It's pretty much all the stakeholders that have to be in a room together to break that process down.
Absolutely. A
Right?
credit of a good
Yeah.
project needs to be taken by everybody. It's not one single person, and we know when we collaborate together as a team, that's when the success comes.
Absolutely. Jay, I think you have been like pretty much the master of a lot of facilities, and you had a few questions for me, but I put you in the spot just now, so.
I can see you around, Ritu being there, and then Sabina is there, Vikas is there, and I see Deben and Shashi and Ashwani around. It's like a design studio. I'm getting very, very nervous, but taking a cue from what Vikas said, yes, we did a project in pandemic, one of the company where we were able to pull it off during pandemic without any kind of, showstoppers. That was a bit challenging because I'm sure I will not take the name of the company which had a problem 2 weeks back where we had a kind of fatalities and the project had come to a standstill. So I agree with Ritu. What Ritu said was that when you're managing, she said 19 stakeholders. And when you're managing a project, the important thing is not the stakeholder, not the outside stakeholders. When I talk to you, we have been speaking to each other for last 2 years and we have had agreements and disagreements. And at sometimes you said, Jairam, what you have created is good. Sometimes you said, what I've created is a crap. I mean, which is true at some point
I
of
didn't
time.
say that.
I'm just giving you a kind of a perspective. So what I have felt in the last 2 years creating an office is outside stakeholders like architects, the PMC, and the design build guys. We can manage them because they understand our language. Because it is very important to bring them to a platform. Like Shashi is sitting here. Today we have used his drawing for Danske IT, which is called as a BWOW floor. BWOW floor is better ways of working, which means no employee gets a dedicated workstation to work from. He doesn't own anything in the floor. But the magic and the whole crux of this is he gets 5 multiple workstations to work from. He can work from high-tech digital workstation, he has a focus pod, he has a dedicated telepresence room. What else an employee wants? We have given him every kind of functional, not dedicated, but still which he can use it. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is, I will give a solid example, like Vikas said. We were doing a project in 7th floor, and we had told everybody that apart from the project team, nobody is allowed to enter the project floor because of the pandemic and all that stuff. For me, managing the internal stakeholder was a big challenge. There was a day, 47th day in the project. We had, I will not name, we had some of the heads of the organization who said we want to go and see how the hell you're doing. Because the advantage of us having a new floor was that we were completely collaborating with Denmark team. That's where there was no showstopper. 47th day, the IT head and the country head went into the floor, in a working floor, and after 4 hours, I get to know that the communication cable is cut. I'm not going to brief out what is going to happen, what did happen in the floor. To manage the internal stakeholder is a challenging in project management. That's why I tell you, before we do a concept on the design, we need to have a pre-RFP workshop with all the business leaders. Talk to each and every joker, sorry to use this word, because they feel that they are the ones who normally bring in business to the organization. And everybody has an idea. Trust me, in my leadership team, there are 14 people. They all feel that all 13 are overqualified than me to manage my domain. I get that feeling. I get that feeling that they're all overqualified. They say, Jairam, do like this. Jairam, why don't you do like this? Hey, Jairam, that is not good. But as I say, we are not a profit center, we are a cost center. We need to manage.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
At the same time, I'm not compromising, but I'm trying to say that do this tons and tons of workshops before pre-RFP, get everybody onto a platform, then take the budget from them. As you rightly said, if they want a Google in 1 month, that's not possible. Google in 1 month is still possible if you fix a budget. That's what we did. The 60 days of project, we converted into 120 days and get this 1.5 lakhs done. I will come back to you later.
Sure.
It is-
Because I want to, give this back to Ritu, because, you hit the nail on the head. We constantly kind of come with a budget, it's a prefixed budget, and we don't know who came up with the budget, but when you're asked to design within that, there's always a lot of challenges. So how best can we take care of a situation where everything is thought out from timelines to the budget to, pretty much, and forget the finishes, but at least a bigger vision on what do you want to see? Do you want to see do you want to see the Taj Mahal there?
So just on that.
What is like the opposite of that? So I won't even go there, but I think you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, and this is coming out of sheer my experience of working in this space, many a times what happens is when we are visioning a project and when we are trying to put the building blocks of it before we go to market and engage all the various external stakeholders, I think the problem lies in the fact that, there is a certain amount of a boundary that has already been described, right? So we've taken the workplace strategy, which was the buzzword a couple of years back. Some workplace strategies take it far beyond. They even tell you the color of the tile and the spec of the chair and which color of chair can work. They'll also tell you what paint and the spec of the paint that needs to go onto the walls. So there is no, if I can say, global designs becoming local. There is somebody sitting somewhere in the world who's described this in a nice, beautiful playbook, and the playbook lands on the desk and they say, go take it and execute it, right? So there are already boundaries being put. So it's like a whirlpool, right? You started from that big vision, and then slowly, the workplace strategy is telling you the color, the 50 shades of gray, if I may say, that needs to go into the building, right? And then eventually, there is a number which is specced by our, most creative PMC friends, because most of the times we go to PMC. Sorry, no offense to the PMC
Is
partners
that where
here.
it's coming from?
Okay. But most of the times we reach out to them. They've done so many projects. You are doing benchmarking. Why don't you tell me what is this going to cost? And that's where the magic number starts to get onto the discussion table. That goes into a multi-million-dollar conversation. And here, that's the number with which we have to deliver this vision. And then somebody in the previous topic, I think Debin touched upon the scope creep, right? So scope creep is by the day, like the way the technology changes with the snap of a finger, scope creep also starts to happen. Business walks in, no, now my lab is changing. I'm planning to include robotics as well, so I need some more of X, Y, Z. And that some more becomes such a huge change that the vision now is out of the conversation, right? So I think, and this is just coming out of my experience, the way we do it. Is there anything wrong in what we are doing? I don't think there's anything wrong, because this is the time-tested process as well. But I think what we need to do and the change that we need to bring is once the vision has been put together and when we are trying to put that boundary, do we have the right stakeholders in the conversation? For example, do we have somebody from the architects fraternity to come and say, no, if you go for POE lighting and you want to do that and you want to look at the future-forward design, then, this is not going to cost you 30 rupees per square feet. Maybe it's going to be 350 rupees per square feet. Have we started to bake in some of those, visionary parameters of that future-forward design, part of the estimate process itself, before we go for a final approval on the project? I think that's important. So it's not just the architects. From the previous conversation, I think one of the things maybe our architect organizations and friends need to do is, ESG is becoming a very, very important factor, right?
Environmental,
Sustainability we are talking about. So we're talking about how we're going to make the building live beyond the 15 years at a certain cost of operation, because we all want to be flat. We don't want the costs to go up, right? We want the cost to be flat, or we want the cost to come down. Do we have somebody from that expertise to come back and say, initial capex is high, but over a 20-year life cycle, you will be able to, get your costs within, so it works out. So I think that becomes very important, and I think the root cause is about how we do the estimations and having the right right stakeholders, the cross-siloed workplace leader that we spoke about. I think that's where it starts to emerge.
Yeah, awesome. Great points, Ritu. And I'm going to give it to Sabina because I think she's been like at the end of all of what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I think, most of the time we will come to a client and they'll say, yeah, this is the budget, and really rightly so, why is that the budget? So, as you said, Ritu, I think in the beginning, a dialogue between all parties, the architects, the project managers, the client, I think you need to establish what are your project priorities. Is it sustainability? Is it, what is the life cycle of the project? Understanding everything in a holistic whole, and then coming to this discussion, okay, what is that budget? So budget is also kind of as important as a workplace strategy. It's not just about the number.
No, the workplace strategy should be including budgets and
Including, but that debate about what should that number be needs to be as intensive and as collaborative as figuring out. It's not, okay, we are this organization, we have this much of money, somebody said something roughly for technology and AV or whatever, but why those numbers? What are your priorities? Should that number not go to technology? Should it go to sustainability? Where is that debate on what should the buckets be? So I think that dialogue in some of these larger projects would be really great.
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing a project right now where it's a really mid-sized project, very tight on everything else, and the number on, say, the glass partition is like zoom. That thing is coming from some double glazed thing arriving from somewhere, and you're like, who has set these parameters? I mean, that glass partition is taking 50% of the cost of the project. Why?
What sense does it make?
What is the priorities? So I think those discussions are really
valid points. Yeah.
So before we move forward, Fancy, I'd just like to put now that let's understand from any project perspective, it's now the three components, and it's an equilateral triangle. Time, cost, and quality.
Absolutely.
You try pulling one, the other will get impacted.
Oh, absolutely.
And for us as custodians of the project, be it an architect, be it the client representative, or be it a PMC, okay, we all should be aligned and convinced about what our approach, what our intent is for creating or doing this project. We can, as an internal house, we can have differences of opinion, we can thrash it out, spend time on evolving through the design, curating that design. But yes, once it is locked, for me it is locked. And as Jay said now, that we should be convinced about that design. If I'm not convinced by the design, I should question an architect. But once I lock the design, I'm convinced about it, I should have the courage enough to tell my leadership or my stakeholders, this is it. Yes, and then in our setup, we do understand there will be interactions with the leadership, but then I believe the mature leaders are the ones who accept that, yes, you are keeping them posted, you take their inputs, and you should put in a way, it's not that now we are coming to you for inputs, we are sharing you the design intent. You might provide your feedback, it may or may not be binding on us, because we as a design team have spent hours and hours on that project. And I'll give you an example, we are working on a project now, which is coming up now. We have spent close to around 80 weeks curating that design. 80 weeks, and then it's not typical interaction of now as design process meetings, say roughly around 2 hours per week. So we have spent around 160 hours as a team put together curating that design. But yes, we had minimal issues when we went back to our leadership saying that this is it, because we internally were convinced about that, and then we were firm on what the design intent is going to be.
Would you be able to say who was part of the process? So when you're talking about this many weeks, like who among the stakeholders are part of it?
So stakeholders, we have a dedicated design team which works on, we have a dedicated PMC team which is there, and then our design consultants. So it's a spectrum of now the entire gambit of people who are working on that project.
So I just wanted to build upon what Vikas was saying. So I think the more you foster two-way communication, right? I think when I look at internal stakeholders, they start to get anxious and nervous when they don't know what's going on. $200 million project, they don't know what's happening, right? They don't know where the dollars are going. Eventually, they're going to pay for it in the form of depreciation. So they're the ones who are funding it. The capital may come from any budget, right? So I think to add on to what Vikas was saying, that two-way communication, bring them on. If you're doing a mock-up, show them. Get everybody onto it's like diversity and inclusion, right? You're having a party of doing some mock-ups, get everybody into the party and play the music, let them dance as well, so that there is acceptance of design. But at the same time, tell them that all the salsa moves may not be able to go into the final plan, right? Whatever is workable, at the end of the day, the budget is final. Whatever we can do, we will do. Like I have a classic, an experience that's as recent as yesterday coming in. So we were reviewing the design of a mother's room, and one of the stakeholders stood up and said, well, the women are coming and telling me recliners are not very comfortable in the mother's room. So, it's like, okay, so seek, speak, listen, you listen to it. Yes, the recliners are not very comfortable, point taken. We'll figure out what best is the way forward on the furniture inside a mother's room. But something like this, right? So we now know that there is this input. Obviously, the next step is to, again, work back with the team of experts. One of the things I personally believe, and this is just coming out of my own experiences, I would like, while I would give due recognition to my facility manager hat as well, I want the building to be easily maintained, so on and so forth, but I don't want to shadow upon the creativity of an architect.
Absolutely.
Right? And I'm sure Vikas would agree to me. Just imagine you enter into a building and in a space like this, if you do not see some nicely done up walls, if they're not acoustically well treated, if you do not have some bit of play in this space or the carpet having that motif, how dull and boring this space is going to be. And for the purpose the space is going to be used may not be the best experience or may not be the best. So we need to strike a balance between functionality. I'm a personal believer that the building should have better cost of operations, but it should not, start to limit the creativity of an architect, right? I think that's something that we all need to be cognizant of, and that architect should be able to bring out ways of striking a balance between, the lighting, the air conditioning, the interior fixtures, looking at the vision, looking at what are those, the objectives of the organization on the sustainability front, on the cost of operations front, so on and so forth. So I think that becomes very important.
I think the question then is...
Fancy,
Yeah,
before you move
sorry, go
forward,
ahead.
just to add to Ritu's point now, that reaching out to everyone now and seeking their feedback, I'll just be a little mindful of that, okay? So, because what we have seen is that in our country, typically now if you reach out, people give all their individual personal likes, dislikes and requirements, which might be. So it's better to form those special focus or interest groups and then reach out to them for feedback. Because once you consolidate those feedbacks, they come out in a much qualitative manner rather than seeking, because what we have seen is when you go for the masses now, the individual likes and dislikes come out more prominently.
Becomes personal.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Jay, you have something to
What
add?
I wanted to, to a larger extent, I completely agree with what Ritu said, but to a smaller extent, I disagree with her. What happens here is that the moment you bring in too many people into project management, invariably for their own, as he said, for their individual preferences, they become showstoppers. What is important in a project management is a very strong holistic governance model. What is this governance model is that you have to take your stakeholders into confidence initially before you launch the project. How do you do that? You do that as one great thing what Ritu said is that create that blue book. Try and discuss with them. Take them on your side, because when you have this large group meetings, everybody tends to create a kind of a problem for the sake of creating a question. They don't know what exactly is project. Can anybody in the leadership team knows the carpet what I have used, how much it is recycled, how much it is not recycled? Nobody knows about it. But everybody makes a comment on the color of the carpet. I don't care about it. For me, what is important is how do I manage the carpet? And how do I will not send this carpet to a landfill over a period of time. I would like to send this to a manufacturing furnace where it can be recycled. So the strong governance model is very, very important. What we did, Francie, just take one more minute. What we did in Danske was that we formed a working group. Working group is a cross-functional team, which is myself as a project manager, the IT manager, then all the stakeholders from the business line. pick up some people who can be a voice for you. That is the working group at the execution level. Then we have a steer co. Steer co is basically your bosses, like the country head. Then the super boss secretary in the steer co. So whatever working group decides, steer co can either object it or they don't object it. But what we do is that before we go to steer co, we send them tons and tons of pre-reads saying that this is how we have been able to do the evolution from nowhere to somewhere. So when you send these pre-reads to these people 1 week in advance, they understand the kind of effort we have put in. So it is easy for us to get through to them. So when the steer co goes to ELT, it becomes a cakewalk. So for me, it is very important to take your internal stakeholders into confidence and launch the project.
Sabina, you have something to add to that in terms of sustainability, the things that we face with regard to products and maintenance and pretty much the little bit of, up and down we have with the stakeholders. You have been through a couple of those. Maybe you can talk about an example.
When I was fighting with some of them
That's
for the
right.
right materials.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think again, it's as you rightly said, it's getting that steering committee or that working group, the key people, and getting that buy-in about what should be the materials, what should be used, again, tying back to the project priorities. And using maybe, I think, as a steering committee, as we call it, then having steer group, and I think it all depends, again, on the size and scale of the project.
Right.
The larger projects, the campuses, obviously the steering committee is different. For the smaller projects, it's different. So forming that and coming together with that right vision and keeping, I think, everybody involved, whether it's a budget or starting with the priorities and then getting into the rest of the strategy, the budget, the materials and everything, I think that follows.
So then it's coming down to that one question, which I think, again, Ritu, I'm going to ask you this. So who is that evangelist, right? Who is the owner in all of this? I mean, it's not just one person.
Yeah, it's not just one person, but I think the larger ownership lies with the organization's workplace leader, right? And for that, I would probably put myself on the spot. I think the fact that we have that 360-degree view, we have the full view of that spectrum. We know our external stakeholders, we know our internal stakeholders, we also know where do we want to head to, the internal nuances, what are the limitations of the project we might want. I would see myself as the evangelist in this to be able to strike a balance.
But should it be that everyone is an owner? It's not just one.
Yeah, there is no one leader. I think each one of us are leaders in our own space. And I think giving that, if I may say, the due respect. So for example, when an architect is on the table, giving the architect the voice on the table to be able to speak their mind out and tell them which direction the organization is doing right, but maybe this direction may not be good for the overall project. To be able to take some of those inputs, even for that matter, our consultants, right? So we spoke about the efficiency of the cooling of a building, right? Without considering those inputs and then trying to decide on a glass, on a facade cladding, and then saying this is how it should be. It should look grand, but we are compromising on some other parameters. So I think each one of us are leaders, but that evangelist or the change agent, if I may say, or the person who's orchestrating the show, because everybody can't orchestrate the show. For that, I would put the workplace leader, as the person responsible to be able to orchestrate this show.
Because you had something to add to that.
Yeah, I agree with her. Now, if there has to be one ringmaster, it will have to be the workplace leader. But for me, each component of the project is critical. And then let's understand from a perspective that you as an architect should be proud of what you're creating. Because if you see the way the projects pan out, everybody takes a lot of pride in showcasing their capabilities, putting as part of their client list or their project list what they have created. Similarly is the case with the PMC. Similarly is the case with an individual who's a workplace leader. He showcases it, this was as part of his or her personal CV, that yes, this was a project I worked on, we created this. So I feel unless and until everybody takes that ownership and raises the hand up, yes, it's now my responsibility. Maybe there are certain limitations because let's understand it's an organization for which an architect or a PMC is hired to deliver the services. Fine. But then, unless and until the PMC or the architect are calling black as black and white as white, they would not be doing their rules. So they need to call it out and be open enough in case there are certain things they don't feel good about, because in the hindsight when you look now, there might be differences, there might be issues when you are at the designing stage, but when the final product comes now, it's a win-win story for all of you.
So it appears to me, and most of the times it appears to me that the end objective looks same for everybody, right? So the architect wants to put the best of their designs out there, while they would have done some. The workplace leader wants it to be one of the most talk of the town conversations when it comes to the organization of what is being built. MEP consultants want to also deliver efficiency and all. I think somewhere the end objective is a common objective for all of them. What has happened is it has manifested into their, quote unquote, only in terms of what their scope is. It's limited to that scope, right? And I think what Vikas brought out was, at the end of the day, one of the ways of building cross-siloed workplace leadership is about being able to connect all these dots with a common end objective, right?
Absolutely. Right.
So we are running that marathon. Everybody has their own little sprints to play. But at the end of the day, when you finish the marathon, we are all together at that finishing line. Nobody's coming out first in that marathon, right? Or second place in that marathon. I think to be able to connect all of them with that one common objective,
Yes.
of what we want to build, what is that vision of the building, is something very important.
Yeah,
And then, coming back to Jay's point, absolutely. I think once the project is on the ground, there's a lot of empowerment that is needed at the ground level, right? Somebody walks in and tells me, I don't like this tile color, your lighting is not good in the toilets. I mean, you can keep on getting those inputs, but it's not going anywhere, right? So I think there has to be also an empowerment. So, like this famous Spider-Man quote, right? Power comes with a lot of responsibility, right? So when you're empowered, then you have to be ready for both the consequences and for the rewards, right? You have to be mentally prepared for both of them. So I think that aspect of it becomes important. The moment you start empowering and that end objective is finally connected together, I think it'll be a lot more, pleasurable conversations with this entire team together to be
Right.
able to.
And the realization that pretty much everyone, if your project has to be successful, everyone has to be successful. The architect has to be successful, the project manager has to be successful, the real estate leader has to be successful, the stakeholders, everyone has to be successful. So without that, you're not going to have a successful workplace. So which is why we spoke a lot about this cross-silo workplace leadership, right?
I have one aerospace example.
Yeah.
Sorry, please permit me, I'll just take another 1 minute. So you all would have heard about the Southwest Airlines, right? It has broken the glass ceiling when it comes to low-cost carriers in the United States. Started way back in, I think, 1970s, right? Obviously, Southwest has a very, very strong partnership with Boeing, one of our primary customers in the United States. And what they did, and one of the very interesting things that I want to bring up about that is the CEO of the company, Kellenher, at that time, what he did, the turnaround time of his aircraft to cover one sector, which was about a 1 hour, 10-minute flight, was just about 28 minutes. It was 35 minutes of saving than the other airlines which were operating, which means less than 50%. So he would cover more number of trips with a lesser number of inventory in terms of aircrafts. One of the things that Southwest Airlines did that many years back, what a visionary leader. You all must Google about him. He's a phenomenal leader to be talking about today. What he did was, he said, every person, right from the pilot to the ground staff, to the person who checks in the passengers into the aircraft for boarding process, the person who allows the check-in happens at the ticketing counter, the entire team is responsible for the turnaround of this flight in 28 minutes.
Awesome.
So if the flight does not take off after landing in 28 minutes for the next sector, it is not that one pilot who fails, it is the team that fails. And it's a very, very clear analogy to what we are saying. So if the building is not energy efficient, and that was the vision we wanted to build, It's not the responsibility of that HVAC consultant or, people who are putting the automation on it. It's got to do with architect has a skin in the game. The material has a skin in the game. The client has a skin in the game. Everybody is responsible for that.
Absolutely right.
So it's a
Beautifully.
great example, and I think that's how we need to start thinking, right?
Right.
I
You
have a
had
different perspective to this ownership. See, ownership is very dynamic when you're doing a project management. As long as everything is going good, the ownership is always with the senior leaders. The moment the project goes wrong, it comes onto the workplace leader. I have seen this. I don't know how many of you agree with me, but I go with Vikas, I go with Ritu, that at the end of the day, the ownership always lies with the facility manager or the project manager, because I always feel the guy who takes care of the facility management should be doing the project. Then only it is very easy for him to take it over and maintain the facility, because there is a ownership, there is a kind of a satisfaction, there is a kind of a credibility that he carries throughout his stay in the organization. And I'll take one more minute, which is very close to my heart: sustainability. Fancy, we spoke about it. And sustainability is something which is very close to my heart, wherein when we do a project, there are around 300 line items. We buy a lot of stuff. We buy chairs, we buy carpets, we buy whatever, wool, whatever. But my only confession to all of us, I think you do it. You are a kind of a, for me, don't think that I'm bragging about you. You are a kind of a role model. You and Payal, for me, are like the Bible of the architecture. So how many of us will sit down with the architect or with the PMC and come to a conclusion saying that we are using 100 line items in this project management? Out of that, okay, let's take 20 line items, out of which how much is recycled? Do we do that? I don't think so. I mean, some of them are still doing it, but most of us will not do it. So we have to put a conscious effort to understand how do we support our ecosystem? How do we support our land? That is very, very important for us, because we all have worked in this fraternity for the last 20, 25 years. We need to give it something back to the fraternity, something back to the ecosystem. So the recycling and sustainability factor, giving a clear air, the fresh light is all that important. It's a very, very vast subject. I don't want to go on and on this.
Thank you for bringing this up, Jay, because a lot of companies these days have this 2030 carbon negative goals, and, what does that mean, right? Because at the end of the day, somebody's got to break it down to this. What is the material that's going into your facility? How much of it is recycled content? You can't come to me and say, hey, I have a carpet, it's 100% recyclable. What is the recycled content that's gone into it? So I think asking the right questions in order to, I think, we'll give it to Sabina, because I think she will have a lot to add to this, I'm sure.
I think you're right. Instead of talking about, also we're talking about lead rating, and we're talking about all these
Wellness,
big
yeah.
words. Ultimately, it's really about
Absolutely,
what are we doing for the environment. I mean, in Bangalore, you have great weather. You're making all these glass boxes, and then you're looking for lead rating, and then you're running around US, GBC, or whatever.
And
I mean,
Delhi.
look at the Titan campus, where they left it open. They had some amount of fan circulation. They're actually, forget about their lead rating, they're actually being environmentally more conscious. So I think we need to look at the way we look at it rather than the rating, and really see what are we really doing on the ground.
Yeah. So are we going after a certification?
In fact, I would like to
or are we
challenge
going-
I would like to challenge the lead criteria.
Okay.
Sorry. And I was just about to say that. Thanks for bringing it up. I think all these criterias that are set by these various government agencies, bodies that are trying to drive a certain agenda, I think the maximum agility is needed in those teams. Because when I look back at what is the criteria for lead, I realize it's like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years old, and it may not be relevant in today's day and age in terms of the context that we are living in, right? Yeah. So I think there is certainly a message out there that when we are looking at, lead is a standard we want to follow, right? But is that standard, and how often is that standard getting updated, right? I think that's something we all need to think about.
Yeah, because there are things like the Living Building Challenge. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it's literally how does a building act like a tree out in nature. Vikas, would you have something to add to the wellness and sustainability aspects of what we should be looking at or driving as a leader?
Absolutely. Like we have seen over the last 2 years, When we talk about a LEED perspective, it was now mainly to do with the infrastructure of the building, okay? The sustainability aspect, how do those various equipments within the building perform, what now is a functionality of the building, which may not be actively touching or impacting the end users. Whereas when we talk about a WELL certification, it is related to now the amount of light coming into the building, the amount of the great quality of air which is there in the building, the kind of, you can say, relaxing places within a building. So the focus is now shifting there because well-being is a buzzword, and then we'll see more and more organizations moving towards that. Were we doing it before? Yes, we were doing it before, but then is it only the rating or that certification which you should aspire for, or you should not move more forward? Because like I was mentioning now, the campuses today of the large organizations, the kind of look and feel and the kind of comfort they offer to the employees, it is very, very soothing to say the least. And you feel very relaxed within that atmosphere. Why do we as individuals now, when we want to take a break, we go to those resorts? Because they are closer to nature, either within the mountains or the water bodies or in the forest. So getting those elements of nature within your workplace will be critical. And the more, I'm sure not everybody has a luxury, because there are multi-tenantal buildings and the offices which have already been created, it cannot be undone. But how best you can incorporate into your future designs and aspects will be the key, and how best we can bring nature. Maybe like you cannot now create greenery, but can you get more light within your office?
Absolutely.
All those things which are doable, look at now the low hanging fruit which can be done straight away without spending extra funds and money on it.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for giving us this opportunity. This is a great platform to brainstorm a lot of, topics like this.